Well, good morning, everyone. How are you? Good morning. It's great to see a lot of old friends out here, and what a great forum we're going to have before us today. Panel, welcome. I know a few of you up here. I've served with you several times overseas. Look, I'm Jeff Smith. I'm the Vice President at L3Harris Technologies. And I had the high honor of serving in uniform for our country for 32 years. And it's really a distinct honor for me to be up here and be able to introduce this great panel for a very important topic and what's going on in Europe. And I'm confident that we will have a great discussion and dialogue today. L3Harris, it's been fortunate that we are one of AUSA's 4-star sponsors, and very proud to be a part of this professional forum. Just a great opportunity, a great week, and something that we cherish in our company. It really is all about the servicemen and women and what they do and how they serve our nation. Like other companies, we provide forward-looking solutions to help solve our nation's problems, and for the U.S. Army to be able to deliver to them the capabilities that they need to fight and win. As General McConnell said yesterday, it's all about winning, and we win on the battlefield everywhere, every day. We really appreciate the Association of the United States Army and what it does for educating, informing, and connecting as we see going on here at AUSA this year. It's really good to see the full momentum of the annual meeting happening this week. We haven't seen that in a couple of years, and I know if you're out there on the floor or walking around, you see it as well. Today, it really is indeed my honor to introduce this great panel up here, and I look forward to hearing what they have to say. And without any further ado, I'm going to introduce Command Sergeant Major Retired Doug Gibbons, AUSA Senior Fellow, to actually do the introduction of the panel. So again, welcome everyone. I'm very glad to be here, and thank you for being here.
Well, good morning, everyone, and what a great day to be a soldier or a supporter of the Army, and appreciate you all being here so much. Thank you for joining us for this contemporary military forum entitled Land Power, the Contested European Theater. As your professional association, the Association of the United States Army is proud to provide forums like this one throughout the year that broaden our knowledge base on Army professionals and those who support our Army. AUSA will amplify the U.S. Army's narrative to audiences inside the Army and help to further the association's mission to be the voice for the Army, support for the soldier. Of course, we cannot do this alone. AUSA relies on its members to help tell the Army story and to support our soldiers and their families. A strong membership base is vitally important for our advocacy support in Congress, in the Pentagon, and the Defense Industrial Base, and to the public in communities across the country through AUSA's 121 chapters within the United States and 8 other countries. If you are an AUSA member, we thank you. For those of you, Army professionals, who are not yet members of your professional association, we encourage you to join AUSA by visiting the AUSA membership booth, booth 307 in the Exhibit Hall A, right down at the bottom of the stairs, you can't miss it, or to sign up online at ausa.org/membership. On behalf of General Brown, AUSA's president, and the rest of the AUSA team, I am pleased, and you will find on our distinguished panel a small token of appreciation for your time, a deck of our Medal of Honor playing cards. And so we do appreciate very much you being here with us today. Now I will turn it over to the moderator, Dr. Thomas Carrico, Senior Fellow with the International Security Program and the Director of the Defense Project at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Dr. Carrico.
Well, thank you, sir. Really appreciate the privilege to be here. CSIS is a think tank here in Washington, D.C., we defense think tank, and we just do a whole lot with AUSA and the Army, so really honored to be here. For those watching online, this place is packed. You would think there's something going on in Europe right now, given the interest on this panel. That's also while we've had a few shifts in the panelist lineup today. There's some real-world things that General Williams had to attend to, but we've got just a stellar lineup here to discuss what's happening right now and how we ought to think about it. We're going to start off with Lieutenant General John Kolashevsky, Commanding General of V Corps, followed by Major General Lars Lervik, Chief of the Norwegian Army. Next up is Major General Julian Berdilla, Chief of the Romanian Land Forces, followed by Brigadier General Joseph Hilbert, Commanding General of the 7th Army Training Command. And finally, Dr. Jack Watling, who's a Senior Research Fellow in Land Warfare at RUSI, the Royal United Services Institute in the UK. We've got just a great lineup. Obviously, the conflict in Ukraine has reinvigorated NATO. It's reinvigorated the discussion about land warfare and combined arms and what's changed and what's remained eternal about conflict. So hand it over to you, sir, to get us started.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. And to all of friends and our allies, partners, people I've served with, it's great to have you here. I appreciate what AUSA does. To the distinguished panelists, it's good to see many of you again, and also to meet Dr. Watley. As mentioned, I'm John Kolashevsky, and I'm the 5th Corps Commanding General. While it is difficult to kind of step into this panel while I look at the audience and see former commanders of 5th Corps, I see former bosses there. I also see my wife here, but I don't see my sister here. So I might have caught a break on the family after-action review that will happen this evening. If you thought our DIRT CTCs, our DIRT Combat Training Centers, were tough, I invite you to come to the Kolashevsky household after an event such as this. But all kidding aside, I mean, it is a very important, a very historic time in Europe, and I know that General Williams wishes he was here. If you attended a land power panel last year, then U.S. Army Europe Africa General Cavoli talked about the consolidation of the two ASCCs in Europe, U.S. Army Europe with U.S. Army Africa, into what then became U.S. Army Europe Africa. If General Williams was here, he would talk about a third portfolio that he picked up this past August, and that is he is the commander of LANDCOM. LANDCOM is the Land Component Command under Allied Command Operations. And so it is a NATO billet headquartered in Izmir that he has responsibility for. I would invite you to come next year to see what additional responsibilities get heaped on General Williams. So 12 months from this week, please come back. But General Williams has us focused on a couple areas. So what I'd like to do is just kind of talk theater for a few minutes, and then I'll talk about my portfolio as the 5th Corps Commanding General. So the first is setting the theater, and that is to continue to put the resources in place so that we, with the other 29 members of NATO, can respond to crisis or conflict. And as General McConville yesterday said during the Eisenhower luncheon, he described some of the dividends, some of the payoff from the investment that our country has put into Europe. He talked about the facilities that we have in the ability to reposition forces quickly inside of Europe. I also talked about the force projection platforms that we have here in CONUS to rapidly move people over to Europe or into any other theater as required. He talked about Army pre-positioned stocks and the importance of Army pre-positioned stocks. And he gave an example of 1st Brigade, 3rd Infantry Division, that in a response based on indicators and warnings to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, that we were able to move an entire ABCT basically on no notice over to Europe. And thanks to the great work of the 21st Theater Sustainment Command and Army Sustainment Command, so Major General James Smith, 21st TSC Commander, is right here, second row. He and General Daly's team were able to marry that brigade up with the equipment at Grafenwehr, immediately put it into operation. So that investment is important, and we're continuing to invest to set the theater there in Europe as we get ready next year to christen a second APS set, this one in Poland, APS 2.2, which will actually be a modernized ABCT set. The second thing is presenting combat credible Army forces. As we know, deterrence, it's about will, it's about posture, it's about messaging, it's about having capability. And combat credible forces really are the foundation for assurance as well as deterrence activities. And so that is for the forces that are assigned in Europe, that is for the forces that rotate over to Europe, and that is for the forces getting ready to come to Europe or, frankly, any other theater that the Army and OSD decide. So that's important. But it's also not just combat credible U.S. forces, but the U.S. as a part of NATO, working with the other 29 nations to enhance our common readiness, our lethality, our ability to quickly transition crisis to conflict. And I think that you saw a lot of that play out post 24 February. And I tell you that our allies do contribute quite a bit. The third one is transforming our operational command and control and transforming the force. As described up front, is that, the USARAF headquarters has had to transform to have the two portfolios. And now, LANDCOM with now a 4-star at the head is very important. So that is transforming the theater. I mean, the LANDCOM elevation from 3 to 4 stars is a big deal because it puts it on the same footing as AIRCOM, the Air Component Command of Allied Command Operations, as well as the Maritime Command. And then also on the same footing as 2 of the 3 Joint Force Commands that are in Europe, Joint Force Naples and Joint Force Command Brunsum. JFC Norfolk, which is the newest JFC to have been activated, is a 3-star. But that having a 4-star at LANDCOM is very important. So we've had to transform and are still continuing to transform how we do business over there in Europe. We've also, I am, living proof of it, 5th Corps. We brought 5th Corps back onto the active roles. We also recently activated the 56th Artillery Command, the 2nd Multi-Domain Task Force. We have the 4th Security Force Assistance Brigade, which many of you have probably heard about, that is overdoing the hard work, working with allies and partners in the region. And then just last week, we activated an Air Defense Artillery Brigade headquarters and are en route to activate a Engineer Brigade headquarters and also a SHORAD battalion. So that is continuing to invest in the theater is in the importance of that. We're also modernizing the assigned forces that are there. So the 2nd Cavalry Regiment is undergoing the ITN upgrade, which is a tactical network that helps them better communicate and stay connected and leverage other capabilities that are out there. And next year, we'll modernize the 12th Combat Aviation Brigade as they transition from AH-64 Deltas over to Echoes. So, it's important as we continue to look at investing in the theater. And then the 4th is increasing the scale, the capability, capability and the interoperability of allies and partners. And we do that in a myriad of different ways, and you'll hear about this with the rest of the panel. So if I could go ahead now and turn to the Fifth Corps portfolio. So if we could have the first slide, please. Just a short history of Fifth Corps. Fifth Corps has been on the continent of Europe all the way up until 2013, where Lieutenant General Terry, who I think is in the convention center, I don't think he's here in the room, but I will see him later, he cased the colors and inactivated in 2013. The decision was made to activate it in 2020. So we activated the Corps headquarters at Fort Knox, Kentucky. We first unfurled the flags with General McConville in Krakow, Poland, which was pretty cool. I got promoted there as well. And obviously you can see my name, it's not Irish, so it does have some Polish history, so that on a personal level is pretty neat. But it also is symbolic, as it signaled Fifth Corps' return to Europe. And so 2020 we did IOC, and then FOC this time last year. And I will tell you, it was a very heavy lift for the Army. And there were just so many different organizations that allowed us to work that 12 months to get certified after undergoing a very rigorous 24/7 warfighter exercise as a competitive training audience. So we have been kind of getting after that. So what does Fifth Corps bring to the Army? Well, Fifth Corps brings another 3-star tactical headquarters to the Army. And I think that's important. As you look at the demand signal on our 3-star headquarters, to have a 4th 3-star headquarters, tactical headquarters, is important. What does it bring to U.S. Army Europe? What does it bring to Europe? Well, it brings an intermediate echelon of command and control over rotational forces, as well as many of the assigned combat forces. Not the 173rd, but the assigned combat forces, which is a rocket brigade, aviation brigade, and a striker brigade. So right now that's in excess of 20,000 soldiers that Fifth Corps has responsibilities for. So it brings that. It also brings a headquarters that can conduct operational planning. And obviously in the lead up to the 24th of February and then post 24th of February, I mean, Kevin Marcus, who's the G5 here, he wore us out. And then General Cavoli wore us out as we were working the operational planning. And then the third is it gives us in theater a headquarters that can persistently engage with the armies of Europe at a national level, allies or partners, but then it also gives us the ability to persistently work with the other NATO corps. We are not NATO force structure. We operate under U.S. chain of command. So I report to General Williams to General Cavoli. But we absolutely understand the importance of working with allies and partners. So working with those, persistently working with the NATO corps, the 10 NATO corps, and also the division is very, very important. So you can see on the slide kind of a map of Europe, and you can see our mission statement that is there. And, you know, again, it is focused initially on the reinforcement of Eastern Europe post-invasion, and then on the assurance and deterrence. And I think that's very important. We do that now distributed from Poland as well as Fort Knox, Kentucky. And so we do straddle the Atlantic, but we are integrated into the European battle rhythm, and we've got key leaders placed in both locations, to include a 2-star deputy commanding general from Poland that is over there. In terms of disposition of forces, we have persistent presence in 10 countries in Europe, mainly focused along the eastern flank. And then episodically we'll go into 14. And we have right now 2 divisions. So I've got the 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One, that has got responsibilities for Poland, the Baltics, And then we are doing mill-to-mill engagements with Sweden and Finland, and so they've got responsibilities for that. And then we have the 101st Screaming Eagles. So it was kind of neat. I got to go to General Pappas. He did a 101st reception on Sunday, and I was able to invite myself. So since I had the 101st under me, I felt I was able to go there without a problem. But we also have 2 Armor Brigade combat teams. We have an Infantry Brigade combat team. We have Rotational Combat Aviation Brigade. We've got a Sustainment Brigade. We've got an MP Battalion, and we also have a MI Brigade that are under us that help enable our operations. We also have the 4th Security Force Assistance Brigade that has 10 countries. I think it's 17, 18 teams right now, which again are really paying big dividends. In terms of areas of emphasis outside of the assure, deter, as well as also that reinforcement, is we are working force posture adjustments. We're working investment in the forward operating sites from which we find ourselves. We are working to assist our allies and partners at improving their capability, their capacity. And that is at the brigade and below, 4th SFAB, at above brigade. Both divisions, as well as my headquarters, are partnered with certain countries to look at how they can develop a greater capability to mission command over their own, be it territorial defense forces or their assigned combat formations. We're also involved in bringing the Abrams into the Polish Army. So the 1st Infantry Division is doing that, and they're also helping General Berdilla with the HIMARS integration after they've fielded that. And then we're working to facilitate battle group development. So you've probably heard the term battle group. Battle group is a combined arms unit. It's got infantry, it's got armor, it's got air defense, it's got MPs, Suburni, et cetera. About 1,000 soldiers. We have had those up in Estonia, which is the UK is the framework. In Latvia, the Canadians, in Lithuania, the Germans, and the US and Poland. Well, in response to the invasion of Ukraine, NATO established 4 additional battle groups. In Slovakia, the framework is the Czech Republic. In Hungary, it's Hungary. In Romania, and I know that JJ will talk about this, it's the French. And then down in Bulgaria, it's the Italian. So we're working to integrated with the effort to bring those organizations and improve their capability. And then the last one is promoting interoperability. And that is the human, the procedural, and the technical interoperability that I think is important as we continue to move forward. And that is an effort that I've reorganized my staff to get after. And so what I think I'll do is go ahead and hold there, and I'll turn it over to Lars and then maybe come back with some other points later. Thanks.
Thank you very much, John. We are living in dire times, and winter is coming, and I fear that this winter is going to be hard for all of us. This makes it even more important for all of us to stand together as allies, shoulder to shoulder, to defend freedom and democracy. And as many of you know, Norway learned this the hard way in 1940, that there is a difference between friends and allies. And we were therefore among the founding members of NATO. And then and now we recognize that the US and the US Army is our most important ally. And therefore I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to speak to you here and also to participate in these discussions alongside great allies. In my short introduction, I will discuss how we together best can achieve, promote and enhance our level of integration. And just from the start off, I would like to underline that the integration I'm talking about here is integration we need to succeed as a joint combined team. I do not need to lecture this audience on why military integration and interoperability is important. It enhances our combined arms power. It sends a very strong signal of our cohesion and also leaves no doubt that we will fight as one force. And I believe that the very foundation for us to be able to fight integrated is that we have a common idea of actually what we want to achieve. Or as we in the military call it, we have a plan. The work NATO and key allies have been doing and are doing to establish a set of realistic combined plans at the strategic, operational and tactical level are essential in this regard. Drawing on my own experience from both Brigade Command and as the Chief of the Norwegian Army, the work done by the Norwegian Armed Forces to establish a complete set of plans covering all aspects of our mission from peacetime to war and back again to peacetime has been, I think, the most important driver for transforming the Norwegian Armed Forces to a truly joint force. And equally important has been the integration with NATO's plans and also the bilateral planning with the US and other key allies. This has significantly increased both Norway's and the alliance interoperability. Realistic plans are very important for our everyday operations and key, of course, if we as a combined team need to, in a coordinated manner, change our posture or modus operandi. I will also argue that there are two other positives that comes out of integration from these common plans. It increases our output from exercises and training, and it helps us focus our experimentation. First, some more on the exercises. The Norwegian Army has, over decades, been doing a lot, and to be blunt, we've been training a lot on being cold and miserable together up in the north with our allies. And we will continue to be cold and miserable together also in the future, I can promise that one. However, what has changed is that now, as the training we are doing is actually based on common plans, the training and exercises are mission rehearsals. And that gives a totally different focus. It's more serious on what we want to achieve, and it also enhances significantly the output from these activities. So when the US Army deployed the airborne battalion from US Army Alaska to Norway as a part of Swift Response in May, or when the US Marine Corps exercised their 2nd Marine Expeditionary Force in March, these two activities were credible and focused mission rehearsals. These two training events, with all aspects from deployment, reception, forward movement, force integration, field and live firing exercises, were done together with the Norwegian Army, Norwegian Army elements on the ground, just like we had planned. And for Norway, that has chosen not to request permanent presence of allied units like the enhanced forward presence in the Baltics. These exercises are maybe even more important because they have a significant signaling effect. And make no mistake, our eastern neighbor notices these exercises. I also think that the extreme conditions of the Arctic also provides excellent testing grounds for experimentation of all sorts. And experimentation is increasingly important for us to be able to adjust to the changing characteristics of war. We see that AI, high-tech sensors, unmanned platforms, cyber, the electromagnetic spectrum are all becoming more and more important part of a modern combined arms team. At the same time, we also see that utilization of more traditional combined arms tactics, stockpiling logistics, basic soldier skills, and leadership have not gone out of fashion. Quite the opposite, we actually see them being performed with great success in the Ukraine. Therefore, I believe that in order to succeed on the modern battlefield, we must be able to combine the new and the classics together in the current and future operational environment. And a key element to this is the experimentation to test out new technology, procedures, and methods. An example of this is that when the US Army Multi-Domain Task Force tested out high elevation platform or a high elevation sensor at Andøya Space Center, north of the Arctic Circle, it was not only about testing technology. It was also about testing how this technology could fit into a joint combined operation. Again, going back to that, we actually have a plan that we are working on, and experimentation therefore becomes also a part of mission rehearsals. Closing off, by planning together, exercising and training together, and experimenting together, we enhance our integration. In addition, I also think there is another positive effect, maybe the most important one. It builds trust between soldiers and commanders. Trust which I believe will be essential when things become hard. Thank you very much.
My turn? Good morning, and I'll thank Lars and General Kolashevsky for taking the first part. Two clarifications from my side. One, we'll use the privilege of General Kolashevsky's wife to criticize my professional competencies here for the briefing, because if I need to go to my wife now, Romania is almost afternoon, so if I make her criticize my professional development, it's going to be tough. So I'll benefit from the privilege of having lots of friends in the room, and lots of leaders, and lots of senior representatives from the industrial base that I think we all need to contribute to a common understanding. Number two, still clarification, if you read my humble CV, when you see 2 years in Leavenworth, that's not the prison, it's the school. Because I get that question, and sometimes goosebumps addressing that. I'll use a different methodology, and we trained as a team for this because we wanted to produce better communication and better understanding. So I'll split my 4 topics that I have in times for you to look at some of them. Second objective, I want you to immerse in some of the movie clips, short presentations of what's going on in the field there and what's going on in Southeastern Europe with all the multinational allies and partners participating. So I'll ask the supporting team if I can have topic number 1 and then the first clip, and I'll follow up a little bit on that. Next slide.
Romania does not stand alone.
Thank you. So first issue being the land domain relevant and decisive in Southeastern Europe. You saw some of the examples of how the land forces and multiple allies and partners are gathering in Southeastern Europe for consolidated presence. And the short movie, just few of them. There are probably 2 pillars of consolidation, one being obviously the Article 5, the Article 3, which is the national responsibility of the land to get consolidated. And I can assure you that a lot of what the Romanian land forces are doing for the last 5 to 10 years has been focused on that. We're filling the Southeastern Europe and the threats to that for some time. So this has been 2014 and even before that. So for some of us, some of the allies in the region, this is very much to the front line of the battlefield. Number two is you have a description there of a lot of organizations and generators of capabilities that produce that integration in Southeastern Europe. And for land, this is important because it's very difficult to manage that battle space and that domain with so many stakeholders involved. Just a few of them to mention. General Kolashevsky mentioned the 5th Corps coming back to Europe. Well, for us, having 101st Airborne Division headquarters on the ground, and I can tell you I'm so proud of that. Had numerous discussions with General McGee. One time I told him, hey, imagine if you have had or had been to Normandy before the enemy was there. Okay, this is almost similar. If you get 101st on the Black Sea coast before the enemy is there, and then you can win the fight from D-200, I guess. So very relevant integration for the U.S. forces. The brigade combat team, I'm partnering that with my maneuver brigades, and we're capacitating some of that host nation support capability to produce integration. On the NATO side, we have the Collective Defense Battle Group led by France, and Netherlands and Belgium joined that platform. It's in the initial operational capability development, so they'll probably, by the plan, be there by the end of this year. But we're so fast to integrate that consolidated presence on NATO because we wanted to produce training for the mission, not just training per se. But again, in very short time, especially after last year when the VJTF brigade was deployed for the exercise in Romania, we gained that experience to very much do RSO&M and then integration into the land battle space in Romania. Last but not least, I think we're ready in the land, and that's why I mentioned decisive, because the defensive part of the strategy, so you have deterrence and defense, but the defensive part of the strategy, I feel that very much an assumption of responsibility for me, the Chief of the Land Forces, to take over that leadership and integrate and produce the effects needed. And like I said, we need it tonight. And I'm sure this is building on a lot of, as I started, on a lot of friends and leaders that we have in the room. And if I can have a show of hands, of how many of you think Ukraine will win? Just raise your hand. And you say that's a vote of confidence, and knowing that a lot of Ukrainian friends are watching them right now, if I can ask for a round of applause for their dedication and commitment to the fight. Thank you so much. And now I'll go to a very important pillar, a very good friend of mine, Joe Hilbert, and hopefully he'll get more surprises than I did. So thank you.
Thanks, sir. So first of all, it's really an honor to be here with all of you today, and I guess maybe the probably a little bit unique as well to see a training command on a panel with representing U.S. Army, Europe, and Africa with 5th Corps, Norway and Romania, Chief of Land Forces. So what I want to talk about, though, is the importance of this training command and what we do in an operational sense for the theater, for General Williams, but also for our allies and partners. Really looking back at some of the comments that have already been made by General Kolashevsky and the others as far as where we fit into the structure. So by way of background, 7th Army Training Command, unique structure in our Army. It is a training command that's got some organizations within it that would be analogous to those in the United States, but that those at the same time that are slightly different because of where we're located and the missions that we have. We consist of 5 organizations. The Joint Multinational Readiness Center, that is our DIRT Combat Training Center. It is analogous to JRTC and NTC. It's the 3rd DIRT Combat Training Center in our Army. It's unique in that it is forward deployed. Obviously, it is also unique in that it is con-plan informed and con-plan informing. So as General Leverett mentioned, we train and the lessons that we learn inside that DIRT CTC, we feed back up to the U.S. Army, Europe, and Africa based on the observations that we make, and we design the training objectives based on the requirements that they have. The second organization that I'd highlight is the Joint Multinational Simulation Center, where we do all of our simulations. That does everything from the individual to the strategic, with supporting EUCOM exercises like Austere Challenge, but also NATO exercises like the Steadfast Jupiter series and others, where we are connected with the Simulation Center at Bitgoshen up in Stavanger, and then at Allied Command Transformation in Norfolk, all to make that happen. And then the final organization that of the five that I'd highlight would be the Training Support Activity Europe. They establish all of the ranges, they establish all the training devices that our U.S. soldiers and our allies use on U.S. exercises in Europe. So if there's a U.S. soldier somewhere in Europe, Training Support Activity Europe has been there to set the training environment for them or to provide the training device for them. The example I would give you is, as mentioned, when the multi-domain task force went up into the high north to do the sensor to shooter exercise, we actually at the space range were able to build a surface danger zone for a GMLRS rocket. To my knowledge, it's the only GMLRS rocket that's been shot north of the Arctic Circle. But it was Training Support Activity Europe that went up and built that infrastructure that allowed that to happen. So they're present throughout Europe. And then the final two organizations under 7th ATC that I won't necessarily go into today, Combined Arms Training Command does our troop schools, and then the Non-Commissioned Officer Academy. They're still slightly different, though, in that in each of those programs that they run, you're going to see our allies and partners participate in it, even at a most junior level. An example on the Non-Commissioned Officer Academy I'd give you is the last cycle that we ran. We had a Finnish sergeant and a Lithuanian or Latvian sergeant, and then this next cycle that starts next week will add a Lithuanian one. We try to have one young non-commissioned officer in each of those classes, at least one, providing, when we talk about the human part of interoperability, providing an opportunity to build and to begin that at a very young level for our young sergeants and corporals really across the alliance. So when we think about those first three organizations, JMRC, JMSC, and TACE, and what they do for the theater, what I'd like to do is kind of walk through that framework that General Kolashevsky mentioned, the four focus areas of setting the theater, providing combat or credible land forces, transforming the command and modernizing the command, and then finally building capacity and capability and interoperability with our allies and partners, all in an exercise construct or in a training construct supported by one of those three organizations. So when we think about JMRC, there's probably four main exercises that I'd highlight that they support that achieve those ends. The first one would be Sabre Junction. That's what we do for the Europe assigned forces, either the 173rd or 2nd Cavalry Regiment. It's a CTC rotation, just like a JRTC or an NTC rotation, with the unique twist that it's always done with allies and partners. Sometimes as few as 7. I've seen as many as 17 countries on the troop list of varying size, but we will at least have one allied battalion in that U.S. formation in that CTC rotation that they'll be able to go through. Where it becomes in the con-plan informing, often that battalion is a partner battalion to that brigade. So for example, the 173rd coming through, they may bring the Folgori with them out of Italy, or 16 Brigade out of the UK as a partner unit that they have. Likewise, 2nd Cavalry Regiment, 201st Tank out of France, or any of the other partners or allies that they have. In various scenarios, they bring them in, and we're going to train. We're going to train in an environment that those soldiers would see as a part of a NATO force. The second exercise program under that JMRC umbrella becomes Combined Resolve. So that's what we do for the rotational brigade. Those brigades that General Kolashevsky mentioned, 3-4 ABCT as an example, or 3-1 Cav, or most recently 1st Brigade, 3rd Infantry Division. that provides them an opportunity to train with the allies that they have on those forward operating sites and in those forward locations where they are stationed, to train with them in an environment that's in a European theater and in a European operating environment. Third, that's most unique there is Allied Spirit. Allied Spirit's the inverse of Combined Resolve and Sabre Junction. If Combined Resolve and Sabre Junction are a U.S. brigade in a European environment, Allied Spirit, we're going to take an Allied brigade and we're going to put them in at the training center and run them through a rotation and provide them with a U.S. battalion attached to them, as well as a host of other allies and partners. Most recently, we had Latvia come through and run their brigade through that. And then finally, we refer to it colloquially as the away game, but that's the Defender series of exercises where we're going to export the Combat Training Center out to the locations, and we're going to train in areas with our allies and partners in their training centers to build that capacity. I think of Chinku, Romania, Drasko Pomorski up in Poland, and a host of others really throughout the alliance where we can take and set our instrumentation system up and then train with our allies and partners on their turf in their training environment using a full CTC rotation. Most recently, the example from there would be 2nd Cavalry Regiment in Lech, Slovakia, where we were able to export the training center there. So those 4 exercises become the exercises that we do to build readiness for U.S. Army, Europe, and Africa, and that becomes part of that, building a credible land force deterrent, providing ready forces back to the U.S. Army Europe commander that then would be available ultimately to the EUCOM commander as a force available, building readiness for those forces. In terms of set the theater, the way that 7th ATC supports that focus area for U.S. Army Europe, it's a little bit unique. We've got General Smith there. We know that 21st TSC is responsible for RSOI inside the theater. In 7th ATC, we like to say that we're responsible for the T in RSOI. And the example I would give you there, when 1st Brigade 3rd Infantry Division really deployed on no notice and came into Grafenwehr, the first thing we did was run through a JELC cycle of how we're going to integrate them into theater and what they needed to do the training that they needed to do to be ready as part of the U.S. contribution to the VJTF. And all of that was built as part of that. In that case, we thought the T kind of came right after the S. We can also move that T in other places. So when 3rd Brigade 4th Infantry Division came in, looking at what they needed to do as part of their RSOI process, it was really after the O. And that was up at Drasko Pomorski, where we provided them a series of different command post exercises and other exercises that they were able to do under the support of JMSC, providing that mission training command function, but then also the ranges in Drasko Pomorski that we were able to use with Poland, but then use them with Training Support Activity Europe in there to set the training environment to prepare them then for onward movement to the forward operating sites that they would have. So that's where we think we contribute in the set the theater. That's where we think we contribute also in the providing combat credible forces to the land component commander. When you look at transforming the command and modernization or experimentation, that obviously takes place in every one of our exercises, as has already been mentioned. That's a key part of what we're exercising. As new equipment or new technologies or even new doctrine is fielded, we need a place to test it. We're going to test it inside our environments, whether it's on our ranges in Grafenwehr supported by Training Support Activity Europe, whether it's on a host nation range at a forward locating site supported by Training Support Activity Europe, or whether we bake it into one of the exercises supported by JMRC or JMSC. And then finally, the idea of building partner capacity and building interoperability, that happens in everything that we do. As I mentioned, with our DIRT CTC rotations, the ones that are most visible, most familiar with us, there's not a single rotation that happens without an ally or partner participating, and there's not a single rotation that happens without at least a battalion that happening at the battalion level. In addition to framing training objectives for the training audience as part of the joint exercise life cycle, we're also going to come up with interoperability objectives for the unit as they go through. And those are informed by the requirements that General Kolashevsky's got as the 5th Corps commander and requirements that General Williams has as the U.S. Army Europe and Africa commander. And so we think what we've got is the interoperability laboratory, where we can test out not just the technical interoperability of can two machines talk to one another, but can we also test out the procedural interoperability? Do we all understand what the Allied doctrinal publications say? Do we all understand what procedures we're going to use at both the tactical as well as through the spectrum of conflict level, and then finally at the human level? Sir, I think you had the trust begins between soldiers and commanders, and that human level is seen every day in every exercise program that we conduct in as far as in those interoperability objectives. That builds in terms of building partner capacity. I'll just be candid and say often, if not mostly, we are learning more from our allies and partners than they are learning from us, because it's the home turf, sir, as you mentioned, right? You would want to be at D-Day, you would want to be on Normandy at D-200 versus on D-Day. Imagine that. Well, we've got the opportunity to then learn from the home turf in there, and so that's how we support 4 of those 4 focus areas for U.S. Army Europe and Africa. I think the last thing that I would say is that all of that has a purpose, and I think that it's worth potentially having the discussion now or later. And if you look at our training doctrine says that we should operationalize training. We talk about fighting to train. I would argue that in U.S. Army Europe and Africa, the things that we do, not only is training operationalized, but candidly, it is an operation. And it becomes a part of our deterrence and assurance activities inside the theater. So more than just fighting to train, it's conducting those exercises with a purpose. As I mentioned earlier, they're con-plan informed, they're con-plan informing. And if we look at classical deterrence theory of do you have the capability that your adversary knows about? Does your adversary really believe that you'll use that capability? And then finally, is the opportunity cost higher than the potential gain of action? That's what those exercises and that exercise program that we conduct in U.S. Army Europe and Africa actually provides, I believe, the theater. Because what it demonstrates is that we do have that capability. And we don't have it unilaterally, but we have it as part of an alliance of 30. And it's demonstrated on every exercise that we have as we train with our allies and partners. And not only does that assure our allies, assures ourselves, but it absolutely, I believe, deters our adversaries because it shows that we are united in the actions that we take. That we are capable as an alliance and capable at formations at all tactical levels. I look forward to your comments and questions here at the end, and with that I'll pass off to Dr. Watley.
Thank you very much. So it's a cliche that with great power comes great responsibility, and as the only person on this panel with no power, I'm going to interpret that as having a certain amount of freedom to dig into that question of what makes the European theater contested, right? What is the threat and the challenge? And I was really, it's great that we all put up our hands with confidence as our professional judgment that the Ukrainians can win this. It's going to take a lot of hard fighting, but it's possible. But if we had asked that question in mid-February, I think people would have been a lot more hesitant. I was in Kiev at the time. I walked along the line of contact a couple of weeks before things kicked off. I spent a lot of time with the Ukrainian General Staff and with General Sersky, and they were not confident that it would pan out as it has. And the reason I think that that's important to reflect upon and remember is that there's a real risk of strategic complacency. A lot of what you've heard from my fellow panelists is really, really good changes that have happened. Either they were in the works before Ukraine, or they have come about as a result of it, where we are getting really serious about setting the theater appropriately. But as this conflict goes in our favor, I think there is a significant risk that the economic impact of this conflict is going to lead governments to lose the clarity of prioritization over assuring our posture for the future. And I think it's really important that we don't make the mistake that the Israelis did in 1967 of thinking that just because a threat has performed very badly, worse than expected, and has been beaten, that it stops being a threat, right? And the Egyptians were able to reconstitute fairly quickly. They didn't necessarily address all of the cultural issues that were weaknesses in their force, but they were able to come up with a concept of operations that achieved their political objectives in 1973. They achieved surprise, and that put Israel in a very dangerous position. And so I think the longer-term trends are that Russia will remain a competitor and there will be an ongoing contest in Europe, irrespective of the outcome in Ukraine specifically. Sanctions are sticky, they tend not to go away. The Russians now perceive us as a direct competitor, very clearly, and that is a widespread perception. It's not just Putin and his inner circle. And so we need to be thinking longer term, and we need to be thinking about how we sustain the good work that my colleagues have just spoken about, but also address some other fairly fundamental issues to make sure that our deterrence posture is sustainable. So I'm going to talk about three things that I think we need to focus on in a contested European theater. The first one is initiative, the second one is sustainability, and the third one is resilience. And this is drawing directly from lessons from Ukraine. So the first thing on initiative, it's, in December, senior officials from the US administration and from the UK came out and they basically laid out the Russian invasion plan in public, right? We knew what it was. And yet, despite the clarity and the precision and the advanced warning we had, the Russians still achieved operational surprise on the battlefield. The Ukrainian assessment was that the main effort would be against Donbass. On day one of the war, 7 hours before, when they realized that the Gomel axis against Kiev was going to be the main effort, they started redeploying their forces. A lot of their forces were captured not in their defensive positions, but maneuvering to them, and it became a meeting engagement. On the Gomel axis, on day one, the Russians achieved a 12-to-1 force ratio advantage. And what was in front of them was largely light infantry. Now, there are lots of reasons why the Russians stopped, but it's important to flag that they achieved operational surprise, they achieved concentration of forces, and it could have gone very differently. They achieved that in spite of overwhelming warning, and what made them stop was firstly their inability to prepare their own people, brief them and make sure that they had situational awareness. It also came down to the initiative of tactical commanders. So the Russians have built their force around battalion tactical groups, task-organized battalions with all of the enablers. The trouble is, they don't really train in battalion tactical groups, or at least they don't train in the battalion tactical group that they're going to fight in. And so not only did they receive their orders less than 24 hours before they had to go to war in some cases, with maps in their store system that didn't even show some of the towns they were going through, but they also didn't know the people that they were supposed to be working alongside. And so when things started to go wrong, they didn't know the names, they didn't have exchanged encryption keys for their communications, and we saw a huge amount of confusion at a personal level. Why is that important for us? Well, because when we talk about rotating and training and operating, it's really important to underscore that if we are again in a position where there is a direct threat to NATO, we will have to fight with the forces in theater at the time. And the forces that can get there may not be the ones that we've pre-planned. We may have a lot of troops committed to exercises elsewhere or, screening other flanks, not on the main effort. And actually, it's critical that as we modernize our forces, we develop JADC2 in the US case, other communication systems, Morpheus in the UK, that we are able to dynamically generate those force packages and can cooperate. How do we do that? By training, by rotating units through theater, by running this exercise program as though we're on operations. And I think it's very important to underscore just how culturally important that is to make sure that you win the first battle. Because the other lesson from Ukraine is that irrespective of how things go on day one, that will set and determine the logic of the subsequent fight. And if we lose significant ground in the first battle, it's going to be a lot harder to reclaim it, which means that for the UK, we are shifting our posture from an emphasis on a second battle where NATO is challenged, we mobilize and respond, to one in which we are pre-deployed, ready, in position beforehand, we fight with what we have. And that's a critical component of being credible in our deterrence, because one of the reasons the Russians were confident in Ukraine is that when they mobilized their troops earlier in 2021 and we didn't calibrate our force posture, they made the assessment that they could mobilize and complete the operation before we could respond, i.e. there wouldn't be an international response. So the pattern that you set in the kind of operational activity that my colleagues has outlined is absolutely critical to retaining credible deterrence. The second one, I would say we're doing pretty well on initiative with the changes that have been outlined. The second one on sustainment, less so. So there's been a lot of talk about ATGMs being the thing that blunted the Russians north of Kiev. It wasn't. They helped, but the entire Ukrainian arsenal of ATGMs on day one was 9,100 missiles across all of their frontage, 1,400 kilometers of frontage, right? There were upwards of 3,200 tanks that they were facing, and then you've got all the infantry fighting vehicles and so forth. What actually defeated the Russians on the Gormel axis was 2 brigades of artillery. And in terms of the ammunition stockpiles, I won't comment on the stockpiles that the Ukrainians have, but it's worth noting that in the 5 years prior to the conflict, Russian sabotage destroyed 210,000 tons of 152 millimeter ammunition in Ukrainian stockpiles. Okay? And they still had enough to have 2 brigades firing all day, every day for 2 months against the Gormel axis. Now, the interesting thing for the Ukrainians, of course, is that by the time we get into the second phase of the war in the Donbass, the Russians are able to achieve, even though they only have a 2-to-1 advantage in the number of artillery pieces, they manage to achieve a 10-to-1 advantage in the number of guns that they have firing. Why? Because the Ukrainians had burned through their stocks. And at that point, our support to Ukraine became absolutely critical to their ability to fight, and it has remained so since. But the point there is, how many of our countries in Europe could have sustained that force, right? I was looking at one railway station over a 10-day period in which the Russians moved 13.1 thousand tons of fuel just to their maneuver forces. The scale of the logistics operation they undertook was huge. And when we look at our own enablers in European NATO, they're not what they should be, certainly in the British military, and I'm sure it would be the same for others. That is especially the case if we think about a challenge in the Indo-Pacific, right? If we end up in a few years' time with a challenge in the Indo-Pacific, the US Army is well postured in terms of its teeth, but its tail is less than I think would be optimal from the US Army's perspective. It will look even less optimal if they are having to also sustain troops in the Indo-Pacific. And if you remove some of that US enablement, then the question becomes, are European allies prepared to step up and meet the scale of the demand? There's also an element there about our industrial capacity, right? Firstly, how big are your stockpiles on day one? Secondly, how quickly can you manufacture ammunition? And we are very, very quickly finding that we're not really set up in Europe to be able to sustain prolonged combat operations. The US is in a much better position in this regard. But again, in terms of Europe using this opportunity to set the theater, to have a credible deterrence posture, to be able to free up US capacity for other global security demands that might nonetheless create economic effects that are a threat to European security, and so it may be in our interests for the US to prioritize other issues, then this is a point where we need to invest in our defense industry, rationalize our ability to sustain one another, and that's why the exercises that my colleagues have spoken about are also really important, because what the Ukrainians are finding is that over the last few years, NATO standardization is not so standard. And they're having some real challenges with something that should fit in the same tube, not. So we need to resolve a lot of those issues. The final thing I'm going to talk about is resilience. And there's a lot of misinformation out there about the reliability and effect of Russian fires. People saying that they malfunction a lot, they don't work. Trust me, I was in Ukraine in April, in June, and I was a long way forward in June, in August. I'm sure I'll be back at some point. Russian fires work. There are lots of reasons as to why they're not necessarily hitting sensible things, but it's not technical. The most obvious one is that from a cultural point of view, the Russians seem to prioritize their fires based on when they received the fire mission, as in chronologically based on, I'll do this one because it came first, and then this one because it came next, even though one of them is a dynamic target and the other one comes from intelligence. The result being they're often about 48 hours behind the curve. They also don't take targets off their list and reconfirm them unless there is an explicit reason for why they think that target is moved, which means they hit things that are about sometimes 15 years out of date. When you look at the maps and see where the missiles hit, you can kind of go, I know what they were trying to hit, but that hasn't been there for a very long time. The point being, the Russians are able to deliver very, very significant fires throughout your operational depth, and they can do it accurately. They can do it quickly. We have seen them hit individual TLARs, so mobile air defense systems with Iskanders, right, with ballistic missiles in this conflict. When they have UAS up looking at a target, the kill chain is about 3 to 5 minutes before you get effective fire, and the fire keeps on you when you move. So they are able to do it at a technical level. Culturally, they haven't closed the loop, and they are way behind the curve. The thing there is that they can fix that. That's a training issue. They probably can't fix it in contact, but if we're looking about preparing ourselves, this is a threat that's going to be going on for a while. And it has some implications for us, because if you look at the consolidation of the way that we do air operations at the moment, there are lots of disused airfields around Europe from previous generations. Most of them, we don't necessarily have the depths of deployable spare kits and so forth to be able to utilize that infrastructure. And so a lot of our capability is pretty concentrated. And the lesson from Ukraine is that unless you can disperse your logistics, which is especially difficult in a multinational context, they will be struck. One of the critical reasons for Ukraine's survival was the survival of their munition stockpiles. So they started dispersing their munitions about 3 days before the conflict. They were anticipating the Russians would strike all 20 of their national major stockpiles. The Russians did, but the munitions had been dispersed, and the Russians only caught one of them. The interesting thing for the Ukrainians is that because of that cultural problem I highlighted, the Russians also didn't interdict those munitions, and they were then subsequently being moved. The Ukrainians had assumed that they would, which is why they were slightly pessimistic on some of their planning. But if we look at fixed infrastructure, fixed defensive infrastructure for air defenses, the Ukrainians lost 75% of it on day one. And so if we are relying on fixed sites, known locations, and we are not able to disperse our logistics to move that material quickly and dynamically, and we're not able to do that between multinational formations where we don't necessarily have perfect C2, and where we have units rotating into theater that haven't necessarily worked together before. If we can't do that, then we are very vulnerable to a whole range of bottlenecks being created in our sustainment. And so resilience is absolutely critical. It's critical for our economic infrastructure, and we're seeing the importance of the economy in this conflict. These are all solvable problems, but they are solvable if we collaborate, work together as allies, are a bit more open about some of our own shortcomings with each other, and if we make a dedicated effort to resolve these things. And if we can do that, then I hope that in a few years' time, we can have a panel in which Europe is no longer contested. But at the moment, and for the foreseeable future, it absolutely is. And so it's important that we remain vigilant and that we continue to exercise and ensure our interoperability. I'm sure there's a lot of questions, and so I've exceeded my time and will relinquish to the chair. But thank you very much.